Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final session for the day, Online Strategies for School Psychologists in Mental Health. We appreciate you being here today, and I want to start off with a big shout out and huge thank you to eLuma and their team for working with us on putting together the sessions that we've offered today. It's been an incredible day of learning, and I really appreciate their support in being able to offer this for you. We are hosting, as Illinois Digital Educators Alliance, virtual sessions throughout the week on a daily basis. And last week we had a special education teacher reach out to us and share their frustration that their needs weren't being met with the resources that were being put out. So we worked with Dr. Kevin Rubenstein from Illinois. He is Director of Special Education, and he put us in contact with the eLuma team. And within a week, the eLuma staff put together these incredible sessions. So we very much thank you for your support. And I am very excited today, in particular for this session, because I was a former school counselor and find it a very unique situation to be meeting the needs of students through this way on an online platform. So with that, I would like to introduce our presenter today, Paula Morrison. Paula is a school psychologist for eLuma. She was born and raised in the San Fernando Valley in Southern California. She's been a school psychologist for 20 years, serving districts in California, Utah, and Georgia, as well as serving as an accessibility service director in higher education. Her experiences providing support services from early childhood to adulthood have enabled her to grasp a longitudinal view of how special education services support an individual throughout their academic career. Despite these valuable experiences, nothing compares to the lessons she's learned as the parent of a child with special needs. It is her passion to help innovate and collaborate so that collectively we can all find the right solutions for our changing world. So with that, Paula, I'm going to turn it over to you and look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for attending today's session on online strategies for school psychs and mental health. As we mentioned earlier, a changing world is exactly what's happening right now. And so these are the topics that we like to go over today. The first being the tips for telepractice, especially in school psychology and mental health. Some resources that are out there if you will be doing some assessment, and then resources for school-based counseling. Overall, we've got this. You know your field, you know how you like to work, and you know the tools that are available to you. I just wanted to add some additional resources out there and how you can use those in your current practice. So earlier today, if you've listened to the previous webinars, we've gone over some video conferencing, but some key factors to think about, especially in mental health and school-based counseling, is the confidentiality requirements that we need to meet. And so when you're using an online platform, maybe you're using Teams or Zoom, you want to make sure that your provider, your IT provider, has all the right requirements met, that the security is in there, and that you only need to worry about who is coming into your classroom or into your Zoom meeting. So as the host, as the practitioner, it's up to you to make sure that you only let the right people into your classroom or into your meeting. The environment is also key. You want to make sure that you have not only the right environment where you are at, but for the clients that you're reaching out to. For example, the student that you may be reaching out to needs to be in the right location. You want to make sure where that location is at. You want to make sure that they have some secondary way of reaching you in case the internet goes out, or if they didn't hear something, how are they going to reach you? And then attendees is also key. When you log in and you have your students also logging in, you want to make sure who else is there. Is mom or dad there, or is there a caregiver there, or a guardian, in case you need to reach out for some help or ask additional questions. and then location where you are meeting. And these are the parameters you do set. And so some locations, especially if you're going through counseling or school-based issues, you want to make sure that they're maybe not in a secluded area somewhere far away in the home, that somewhere in a location that not only they have privacy, but that there's someone nearby that you can ask them to go call. And then the resources and that you want to take a look at is, one of them, of course, you may be already familiar with, is the NASP online bank, especially for the COVID-19. They have several handouts for parents, practitioner guidelines, and things to think about as far as confidentiality. Pearson has also started initiating some daily blogs about telepracticing and things to look at as far as changing the way you provide those services. LinkedIn has a great short class on online teaching, and now that we're going into this telepractice mode for many people, you really do have to kind of change your lens on how you're providing those services. In a sense, you are teaching virtually those skills that you might have done one-on-one or face-to-face. And perhaps one of our greatest resources is on our own eLuma website, where we have a series of videos that are already uploaded, not only for each area that we've gone through in today's webinar, but just overall how to set up your camera, how to set up the lighting and make sure that you have the right seating available. We've talked about this earlier today in the other previous webinars, but these are also available on our eLuma website. And practice. You know, we can tell you all the things that you need to have in place. We can talk about the tools and the lighting and the setting, but ultimately you really do just need to practice. You need to call that niece or nephew or grandchild or whoever you have somewhere else and say, hey, I want to run through some things, and practice using your platform, practice sharing your screens. Take a look at how that direct lighting is on you, whether it's indirect or direct. You want it to be more reflective. Otherwise, if you have glasses like I do, you're going to have these big spotlights. Also, the audio, trying different headsets. Some may be more or less comfortable working with the different earpieces. These we can talk about, but until you actually are doing them online, you'll kind of figure out what works best for you. And then always have all your materials up on your desktop. The younger children, you really need to be able to kind of switch gears as their attention kind of wanes, and so having those extra little apps we talked about earlier in some previous webinars, things that are games or coloring apps or visual schedules, have them already open. So if you need to switch gears and switch your screens and show them something to kind of keep their attention, it's right there available for you. When we're talking about apps, you also do need to make sure you check the federal guidelines about which apps are going to protect the privacy of your students, because you don't want to refer them to an app and then not have them be aware of the privacy issues. So I do have hyperlinks onto this slide. So when you do receive copies of them, you'll have those links as well. So for assessment, now, each state has their own office of how they're going to move forward with assessment. So, for example, the California Department of Education just released, their formula, or what they're requiring as far as assessment and the prior written notices. Georgia is also doing that as well. But there are some areas that you can look at, and I did mention the Pearson Corporation. They are providing online webinars or training videos on how to use specific tools. They are also allowing for some free assets, the digital assets on the Q Global. And some of those are highly valuable, especially when you're looking at screen sharing. Now, if you currently use the Q Interactive and are using the Wechsler scales with the iPads, they have a deep dive on how to integrate that iPad into your screen sharing, what they feel is going to work for you. They also have some assets such as the Kaufman, the KTEA's testing templates are up. They also caution you on what not to do as far as assessment. Now, they are currently working on a study in Colorado as far as looking at the virtual ability to provide assessment on some of them. So not everything is available to be assessed or to be administered online, but they do have some really great information, and they have a podcast that's just kind of started about looking at the future of virtual assessment. The eLuma website that I referenced earlier also shows you how you can mirror some of those iPads to their screen sharing. Again, only utilize what has been approved by the publisher to be administered virtually. By no means am I saying to take screenshots or pictures of visual stimuli books. That's not okay. It's only what's been already approved. Training available, again, as far as administering virtually, is on the Pearson. And then you do need to set a schedule. There's a learning curve, as you would expect with anything. So I just kind of myself went online and tried to do a section of one of the KTEAs with a 4-year-old, and that was, it took longer than I thought, especially if you're new to the virtual world. And you do have to kind of think about how you're going to get responses when they want to point, and they don't have a document camera. Traditionally, we use a document camera on the school site and have an assistant. In this case, the parent is now your new assistant, so there's a conversation that has to happen on what the expectations are, whether you're providing that counseling service or some form of assessment. You need to let the parent know what your expectations are, what kind of environment. Do we need something in the morning? Do we need something in the afternoon? And then what are those incentives? Have a good conversation with the parent or the guardian on what are the best incentives to kind of help keep your student engaged and interactive during this whole process, whether that is a storybook or a coloring page, a treat that they may like at home. Those are all part of that communication with your new assistant, hence the guardian and the parent. Now, when we look at resources for parents, the NAS page has this great website as far as talking to your children about this pandemic. But what I've really liked, and these, what I've really liked is that we are using a lot of the same things that the SLPs are using. And so we're taking the social emotional components and using that towards the goals. So depending on the age group that you're working with, I really liked, and I'm going to try to, I hyperlink these. I'm going to try to go ahead and go to some of these. So Seesaw is something that teachers and SLPs, and you can go ahead and in advance assign a student some of these, like identifying feelings. Maybe that's something you're working on. You could try and do that, and then when you do meet virtually, you can try and have that conversation with them. What I also liked was the Epic books, and this is something that allows videos and audiobooks, and they have an SEL component for grades. I'll show you all the way up 7th grade and up. And again, you can either assign this ahead of time, you can go through them. I use them as a fun activity, as a rapport building. I find it really helpful to keep my student engaged and have them as breaks. But when we're looking at when we're looking at how to work best with the younger populations, you do need to kind of switch things up. Pearson is also providing the social skills inventory, the manual, and the instruction, the classroom manual, and that will give you lots of great activities on what you can build and work with your students at home. Now, for parent education, you kind of need to assess your learning. Where are you at, and where do you need to build those skills? And for me, I needed to kind of reframe my perception of the classroom now that we've moved into a full online program. Typically, we work virtually with a brick and mortar, and so there's kids at schools, but now everybody's at home. And so my own learning curve on how I could administer some things and how I could reframe things. I mean, I needed to engage myself into some learning, and I looked into some LinkedIn classes on how best to provide those social emotional components. Teach what the expectations are. So again, when you're engaging with the parent and talking about what the goals are, let's frame that. Let's break that down and say, hey, I'm going to try this unit on this area in identifying emotions. And we're going to do this, and I'm going to send this out, and then we're going to have a face-to-face. And so you really do need to engage your parent, and they become a part of that process. One thing I did learn recently, I just did this training on the flipped classroom, where it's that hybrid, where we're kind of not spending a lot of time with the instruction, but we're giving that instruction and then following it up. That is the link to this shows you kind of a video of what that looks like in the classroom. And so that helped reframe my mind as far as how I'm going to be engaging with my students. I'm going to try and give them that assessment or that activity, and then follow that up with that engagement. Now that may work and vice versa. Maybe you need to have that face-to-face engagement first, we'll follow that up, but it's something a little different than what we're used to doing when we were all inside of a classroom. Now, eLuma and this EC had a webinar, which was also, I think you should check out, that talks about how best to engage the parents and how best to provide that virtual experience to your students. And then lastly, that parent communication is key, because now they're your partner. They're a part of this whole process with you. And then you can get their input on where are they at, assess their expectations. School-based counseling, again, there's the local chapters of the school psychologists associations have great viewpoints, and for the state of Illinois, I'm sure that yours does as well. NASP Online is a great area also to look the current what's available. We're looking at more structured lessons than I think that we were before. Previously, we talked about the Social Express, which is great if you're working with students on the spectrum, especially, that really just break things down. Books like the Epic books and Seesaw. But I think if you really need to find that specific niche, now is when we think outside the box. We think about what could we be doing? What is not out there that I need to have? And so you have that ability to create your own lesson, your own activity before you meet with those students, whether that's through an Adobe Presenter or through Jing, making your own PowerPoint or your own YouTube video. We are just needing to reframe the way we provide these counseling sessions. Now, with our current role, probably the biggest issue I've kind of touched bases with psychologists throughout the United States and getting that kind of a view. I talked to some in Northern California and Southern California, Colorado near Denver, Utah. I checked with some in Texas and as well as in Georgia. And the number one thing they said right now, since they've started working from home, is providing behavior intervention supports. And that's probably the bigger area where we're really now teaching the new teachers at home how best to use these supports. Now, earlier someone had mentioned, don't try reinvent the wheel, use what's already in there and then help supplement that or help them understand how that works. And that kind of ties into your consultations. So probably I'm expecting that most of you are providing more consultations with a parent than you did before, because you're spending more time with them. And then online counseling, as I mentioned before, is individual. Now, perhaps you might have had that lunch bunch, or you might have had that group. You have to be really, really careful with that because this environment has changed, and I find that fewer psychologists are doing the group and they're doing just more one-on-one, because you just don't know what the confidentiality is like from place to place. So there's no specific guidance at this time, but most psychologists are choosing just to change their groups into individuals and then supplementing with the behavior intervention supports. Assessment is kind of on the hold, although it is available in some areas. For example, if you needed to do some rating scales, most of the publishers have an online means to do that, whether it's an autism rating scale or social emotional or behavior. For those of you who have maybe initials that are waiting or reevals that are waiting, some people are working kind of doing the framing of that evaluation and waiting till they get to see their students back in the classrooms for the full assessments. Now, for those of us who do telepractice, we do our assessments when they're at the school site with a assistant on that end. And then ultimately, I think collaborating, if there's ever been a time for school psychologists to need to collaborate, that would be now. We all have a different and very specific, unique environment. We all have a specific demographic that we're trying to reach. You know, our states have different information that they're releasing, even though the federal government has provided some guidelines. Each individual state is interpreting that and adding to that. Most of us are in spring break right now, but ultimately we're expecting for some changes to happen, whether your school already has a closure for the rest of the year or they're waiting to see when they'll return. I think collaborating is now when the school psychs and mental health really need to kind of support each other, because what we do now is really going to be outside the box. There's no event in time that any of us can really say we've been through before. And so the guidance that we receive from our state and federal government is something that's going to kind of give us some direction, but ultimately when it comes to one-to-one, it's up to us to figure out what's going to work best. And traditionally, there hasn't been a specific school psych website. We've kind of taken from here and there, and if anything, we've worked very closely with the SLPs. So a lot of the tools that they use are tools that will be helpful for us. So as I mentioned, this is a very collaborative, unique time, and I've been trying to gain support and information from other school psychs in other states. Ultimately, we need to figure out what's going to work for you in this changing world, in this picture right now, because likely it's going to change again. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Paula, thank you so much. Great information, and you know, just incredible the work that you're doing. We really appreciate your expertise. We do have a question from April. She's asking if intervention is evidence-based.
Intervention, I believe that is through speech and language. So yeah, yes, I believe it is. It's not a tool that I use often. I kind of just pick the social emotional activities, but I believe it's part of the speech and language as well as education program. So yeah.
Great, thank you. And feel free, the chat window is available for you to ask questions of Paula. In the meantime, I'm also going to add in a few links for you as well. The first link that I'm gonna put in is the IDEA Illinois website with our calendar. It has upcoming events that we are hosting. We do anywhere between 6 to 9 virtual office meetings, webinars, etc., that are free to join. So that link there will have that information for you. I'm also going to put in a link to the professional development hours that we are offering for the webinar today that you are currently on. If you're an Illinois educator, that will provide you the evidence of completion that you need for the renewal into the ELIS system. If you are not an Illinois educator, feel free to go ahead and fill out the form. We are happy to offer that to you. If your state is reciprocal, it may be of benefit to you. It does ask for an EIN number, which is a number specific for Illinois educators. If you're not an Illinois educator, feel free to just put in a 6-digit random number to continue through the form. And if you have any questions, I will also put my email address in the chat window, and you can feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any issues with those links. Paula, we do have another question from John. How do you involve parents during individual sessions with lower functioning students?
Okay, that's a great question. So it's really dependent on that level of functioning. So when we're talking about lower functioning, if we're talking an ID category, you know, you're going to want to gear your activities that are engaging, but also to have that parent there nearby to keep the student engaged and attentive, not, you know, removing distractive stimuli, toys, whatever is around that could be distracting to the student. Also, that conversation with the parent about what's going to be the incentive. If it is as low function as an ID student, you know, is that incentive going to be some crunchy snack to keep them engaged or a sweet treat? If you're looking at a mild, we want to talk to the parent again about the level of attention, focus, understandability. You know, it's really, you really have to find out from the parent what are the tips and tricks for that student. They know how to work with that student. They've been doing their own sense of behavior intervention at home. And so when you look at your goal, whatever that IEP goal for counseling is, you want to include that parent and say, here's my plan. We're going to try this story here on, I don't know, I'm kind of make something up. It's like this story on empathy. And then we're going to do an activity sheet after that. So I'm going to send that parent the activity sheet, and I may choose to do the storybook first, or I may choose to kind of do the activity sheet and the storybook as a follow-up. It really just depends on that individual student. And so you would get that feedback from that parent on what's going to work best. But ultimately that parent's going to be your assistant in helping the student be engaged.
Thank you, Paula. And I knew, just for those of you that may not be as familiar with Zoom, if you are wanting to ask a question in the chat window, if you hover your mouse over the bottom of the Zoom window, the chat icon will show up. You can click on that chat icon and it'll open up the chat window where you can put your question in. John said that was very helpful, Paula. Thank you. We also someone did ask a question about receiving the slides through the email. So just for clarification, yes, if you are on the webinar today live, or if you have registered for the webinar, we will follow up with you with links to the recording, links to the resources, and links to the presentation that Paula has shared today. Are there any other questions? If so, again, please feel free to put them in the chat window. Galen is asking, in my district, we were suggested to create Google Classroom for our caseload and assign things there. My principal asked that I add her and the assistant principal on my Google Classroom as teachers. I'm concerned about the confidentiality here, both with having multiple IEP students in the group, as well as with having students feel free to share if the principal and assistant principal are teachers on there as well.
Okay, so I guess I just need a little bit of clarity. So it's not uncommon for the administrators to be aware of who has an IEP. So their access to that information should not violate confidentiality. But for students to all be in the same classroom and they have knowledge of each other would. And so if your students have the ability to see each other on that Google Classroom or have access to each other, that wouldn't, and I would probably create those individually or find some way to not have them interact. So we use a Zoom platform and it's individual one-on-one. And so in a Google Classroom, you'd have to individualize it in one way.
Thank you, Paula. Dawn is asking if she uses Google Meet to have sessions with students. No one else from the school is present. Is this appropriate for confidentiality?
So Google Meet, as long as it meets the security criteria, you do want to ensure HIPAA and FERPA compliance. As long as the settings are there in that no one can jump into your Meet, because you don't want to be, have a surprise visitor into your Google Meet. And that's kind of the way we practice. It's just that individual, that student, and the practitioner. What you do want to make sure is that there is another adult present in the home, like there's a guardian, babysitter, or someone else available in the home that you could ask them to go get in case you needed them to. So typically in our sessions, one-on-one, an administrator, a teacher is not a part of that session. They are individualized school-based counseling sessions. I hope I understood that question right.
Yes, I believe that you did answer what she was asking. Thank you. Sean says, our district uses a signed informed consent for students to participate in a group Zoom meeting. This affords us access to the benefits of a group modality while providing informed consent about the risks.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's ideal if your district can do that. Not all districts are using an online signing like a DocuSign, but if yours is already providing that, that's fantastic. And what I should point out is that they all need to be within the same school or the same LEA. Some practitioners have different contractors, and they may have a contractor with XYZ LEA and then another one with LMN LEA. You can't intermingle those. So those consents are only for that LEA. So just to make sure that you're not thinking it's a broad, it's that consent for group is only for that specific LEA.
Thank you for that clarification, Paula.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other questions that anyone has or anything that anyone would like to share? All right. Well, Paula, thank you again so much for your time and the opportunity to connect and learn from you today. It's been incredible, and everybody's starting to share their thanks for the resources and information that you have provided. So a huge thank you to you and to the entire eLuma team. I really can't say enough thank yous at this point in time for what you've all put together and your willingness to share and support Illinois educators. So we very, very much thank you for that. And if there aren't any other questions, it's been a really exciting and very fast day, I have to say. To the rest of the eLuma team who's been on, George and Dennis and Ariel's Facebook Living this, we really appreciate the time today. It's been great. And I wish everyone a wonderful weekend ahead and continued success during this e-learning climate that we are in, and stay safe and healthy.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Have a great one. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.